Go ahead.
Okay, very good. Good evening and welcome to the June 17, 2021 meeting of the ERCA Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order. And just to confirm that all members attending from the in-camera session preceding this meeting are still with us this evening. And Mark Carrick, a counselor from LaSalle, is joining us for the ERCA Board and should be, and there he is. Welcome, Mark, as well. And thank you all for joining us this evening and to all the viewers at home. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America, who've been living and working on the land from time immemorial. At this time, I would ask that we observe a moment of silence in memory of the children who continue to be discovered in unmarked graves at the sites of former residential schools across Canada, and reflect on the lasting devastation caused by this institutional system and on our collective responsibilities to pursue the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Maybe please have a moment. And thank you. We'll continue. Please raise your hand to indicate if there are any members who may need to declare a conflict of interest. I'm seeing none, so we can proceed with this evening's agenda of the Board of Directors. I need a mover for approval of the agenda. Trevor Jones and Mr. Sleeman. Anyone opposed? That is carried. We do not have any hearings this evening. Adoption of the minutes, that the minutes for the April 8th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Directors and recommendations be approved. Moved by Councillor Bowman, seconded in by Councillor Lucier. Anybody opposed? No, that is carried. That the minutes of May 12th, 2021 meeting of the Executive Committee and the recommendations be approved. Councillor Patterson, seconded by Jim Morrison. Anyone opposed? That is moved. John R. Park Homestead, that the ERCA John R. Park Homestead Advisory Board minutes, May 17th, 21. The Homestead recommendations be approved and distributed, that the board confirm the following appointments to the John R. Park Homestead Advisory Board: Ms. Darlene Marshall, Mr. Jonathan Quint, Mrs. Karen Sleeman, and Ms. Michelle Scott as an alternate community member. Moved by Councillor Desjardins, seconded by Len Janice. Anyone opposed? That's carried. ERCA Finance and Advisory Board, that the minutes of the June 9th, 2021 meeting of the Finance and Audit Advisory Board be moved. Marilyn Morrison, Ed Sleeman. Anybody opposed? Any questions or comments? Okay. Business arising from any of the previous minutes? No, seeing none. Do have a welcome to everyone tuning in from home tonight. Staff remain engaged in a number of initiatives to further coordinate streamlined development approvals with member municipalities. At the same time, and through the second year of COVID-related shutdowns, staff continue to issue a record number of permits as development pressures continue to rise. I'm pleased to report that staff planted and distributed more than 125,000 trees to 113 landowners this spring and created 10.5 acres of prairie habitat. Guests continue to visit conservation areas and trails in unprecedented numbers, and we were very pleased to reopen the swimming beach at Holiday Beach Conservation Area last weekend. I would also like to remind members that on Thursday, July 15th, the foundation will host 32nd annual golf tournament. Funds raised through this tournament help to support local conservation projects. If you have not yet registered, please contact Danielle directly to let her know if you plan to participate. We don't have any delegations this evening, but for presentations, on December the 8th, 2020, legislative amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act as part of Bill 229, the Protect, Support, and Recover from COVID-19 Act 2020 received royal assent. Building on these changes, the MECP is moving forward with the first phase of regulatory proposals detailing the requirements for programs and services and how they should be implemented. The first phase of proposals has been posted for consultation on the Environmental Registry and Regulatory Proposal Consultation Guide released. This guide can be found in your agenda package for this evening, and Tim will be presenting this information and is available for any questions. Tim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Got a PowerPoint presented. Thank you very much. Again, the consultation guide has been posted. Next slide. Danielle, do you have control of that? Because I don't have control of that.
I believe Nicole has control.
Okay, here we are. Okay, the guideline has been posted. We're in the 45-day posting period. Comments are going to be put forward by all CAs at the general managers meeting. I've had 2 general managers meetings so far with respect to this, our Southwest chapter, and then all 36 with respect to concerns specific to each region. So along with the comments being put forward by Conservation Ontario, each CA is going to use that as a basic template and then flavor some of the local concerns as it affects our watershed. Our senior staff has had the opportunity to participate on some webinars and have had the opportunity to be provided some input on these changes. The 3 sections thus far being dealt with in the consultation guides are program services delivered by CAs and the realignment and the rescoping from the province, mandatory, non-mandatory, and other programs that you could enter into with specific agreements and or other programs covered by other pieces of legislation with agreements with our local municipalities. The Section 28 regulations specifically are going to receive some amendments and some tweaks. We are at this point in time awaiting what those amendments and tweaks are going to be. I had the opportunity historically to sit on the Section 28 committee at the provincial level, and some of the requests that we actually put forward through this government is actually thinking about implementing. There are still some outstanding definitions that need to be put forward, and we are waiting to see just what the extent of that will be. This first posting is phase 1. Phase 2 will come later this year, and it deals with the structure of some additional municipal levies and some additional standards for some of the regulatory references that were put forward in the first phase. Next slide. These are the transition dates that we are working towards. Some of the fantastic work that your finance department, led by Shelley McMullen, put forward in our discretization of our existing budget towards what we need to be looking at, how we are going to respond to what is being directed. Our programs and our services that are offered fundamentally are not frivolous or outside anything that has historically been identified by the Conservation Authorities Act. However, some of this realignment is going to affect how those programs are funded. We're very fortunate that historically we've been able to access grants and bring those grants back here to this region and utilize those grants to do some of these things that are now identified in non-mandatory. But redefining how we do this and the business model, how we move ahead with, that's what we have to finalize with our transitional planning, and we have to finalize that by December 31st. But again, our budget this year is parsed out and identified and pushed forward with that. We think that we are rather conservative in our undertaking of it, no pun, as compared to or identified with the current government. But Shelley and I feel that we are conservative in what we've looked at in parsing out mandatory, non-mandatory, and additional services. Through the course of the CA fiscal year in 2022, we'll have to provide some additional reporting and some quarterly reporting to both the ministry and to Conservation Ontario where we are at ourselves, along with the other 36 conservation authorities. The province through Conservation Authority could be developing a reporting template for us to follow for that to take place. By the end of December 2022, and just prior to budget implementation year for 2023, all of this transitional planning and realignment has to be in place. Next slide. This again just identifies our current levy structure. And this kind of realignment and this reconfiguration kind of follows what we've historically been following for the last probably 20 some odd years, but the Clean Water Green Spaces was a levy. And basically the bill was sent out to our member municipalities and they had to pay. Well, now the exposure is at almost $1 million and it is non-mandatory. So working through what that is, how we utilize that, how we acquire properties in the future, as we talked about earlier on in some of our earlier discussions, that has to follow standard processes identified by the province, and we are yet to go through some of those processes. The municipal fee for service, or municipal cost share, it varies, and someone has their microphone on.
Yes, Councillor Sleeman does. We're attempting to mute him. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. The fee for service, again, is some of these things outside of the levy formula, but we have many of those right now that are accounted for in our budgeting process. Next slide. Now we start getting into like the three components of the guideline and the structure. And the first one is our mandatory work. And again, it's identified as flood and erosion, land management on lands that we own, and source water protection. And covered in that also is what we apply to the province for the Section 39 funding for our flood operation and our flood response, flood forecasting. This fund it's actually ridiculously low. Historically, it was double that amount up until 2019, and the province saw fit to cut it in half. And it was cut in half at a point in time where we're seeing all-time record high lake levels, and every other day you were seeing notification from your staff here, specifically James, on updating flood advisory status. So we are currently in discussion with the province to give consideration to reestablishing that funding that allows us to do one of our prime responsibilities, and that's to operate the flood contingency plan and to operate flood forecasting processes. Within the mandated programs, obviously, is what we deal with for natural hazards. Predominantly, that's dealing with development matters through Section 28 permitting process. Plan and review that's referred to here is only official plans and official plan amendments. Zoning bylaw and implementing zoning bylaw, consents, minor variances, and everything else falling out of operational planning, that's fee for service, and that's in the non-mandatory component. Our flood forecasting warning is the Section 39 grant, but levy supports that dramatically. And that is a pure provincial instruction and provincial ordered undertaking. And it should be, again, funded better by the province. Operation and maintenance of flood and erosion infrastructure, things within our floodways, things along our shoreline and what have you. We have programs and projects that are still, maintenance money is available for WECI funding, but WECI funding was also cut by the province, and that needs to be reinstated. But us being involved in inspection and operation of any of those projects, that would be covered by levy. Ice management services, historically, from time to time, authority staff have assisted municipality of Leamington and the municipality of Lakeshore with ice management services, and that we undertook surgical and limited ice management on some of our waterways outletting to Lake Erie and to Lake St. Clair. Low water program essentially is not operated as it's not funded by the province. However, we have had to deal with drought response in the past, and drought was one of the original reasons that conservation authorities were formed in 1946, was to deal with drought response, low water response. This activity, although currently dormant, is a mandatory responsibility of the Conservation Authority. Collection and management of hazard information, that allows us to do mapping, that allows us to map our floodways, that allows us to map provincially significant wetlands, which are a component of the Section 28 permitting process under the interference to wetland regulation. And then our communications that allow us to post our advisories and notify municipalities of the threat of flooding. Next slide. Mandatory program is land management within and on Conservation Authority owned lands, our conservation areas. The suite of regulations currently in place for our region and for the Essex region is 200/88. And it's our own set of regulations that we would use on our properties. That deals with trespass to property, damage to property. There's even a set fine for swearing on our conservation properties. So Kevin and Danielle try and keep me out of that property as much as possible, because sometimes my colorful language just wouldn't be taken into account politely. I'm kidding. But those management and maintenance activities that we will be allowed to levy for are defined within this slide. They are to be clarified still with changes that are going to be upcoming with the Section 29 change to regulation. We are still waiting to see what that is, what that allows us to do, what that provides us for additional instruction on our ERCA held conservation area lands. Next slide. Mandatory programs, again, source water protection, administration of the Source Water Protection Committee, and all the work associated with source water protection. We are currently operating with transfer payments coming through the province from MDCP. What's going to happen in the future with those transfer payments? What's going to happen with what we do locally, managing the Clean Water Act and our Source Water Protection Committee is going to be refined with additional language and regulation. A mandatory program is the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, but that only affects Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. But our conservation authority associated with conservation authorities to the north of us that outlet into Lake St. Clair and to Lake Erie, and conservation authorities that sit on Lake Erie could be subject to provisions of an act similar to the Lake Simcoe Protection Act. General managers are having conversations with the province on what that might be, what the repercussions of that might be for us, and if there are costs associated with that, what the province is going to come forward with for money and funding to manage some of those additional responsibilities, or just some of those joint responsibilities that would be also referred to in Section 28. Other acts prescribed by regulation. Historically, your staff here were appointed at one point in time as building officials to undertake Part 8 of the Building Code Act, and that was specific septic. That is still available to conservation authorities, and that would be considered a mandatory function if approved by the board and supported by the committee, and Levy could support that. And again, we are currently engaged as RMO for this region, risk management officials, and provide those services under the Clean Water Act. That's also mandatory function, but it's enabled through another act for us to do that. Next slide. Program service and regulation, again, must be developed each CA when the regulation is finally promulgated. And again, this basically repeats some of those referred to previously, and we'll be awaiting additional provincial instruction. Next slide. Program services, non-mandatory. Some of the mapping services that we do through GIS for municipalities, non-mandatory, be subject to agreements. An interesting thing that is non-mandatory, but it's critical for the success of this organization to work with our municipal members and your staff, is reviewing planning documents. Planning documents subject to regulation, zoning bylaw amendments, and consents, minor variances. It's mandatory for your staff to circulate to us, but it's not mandatory for them to wait to hear for our comments. Our comments are currently provided on a fee-for-service basis to your staff, and we will have to come to terms with a memorandum of understanding with that moving ahead. And again, we identify here that we have existing risk management agreements provided for RMO services with your municipality for other acts that are approved from non-mandatory. But we have to have those MOUs in place to allow us to proceed. And we're waiting for additional instruction from the province on what we can do for some of those other things that we provided historically for municipalities, such as the IDF curve analysis, such as preparation of the regional stormwater guidelines. That's non-mandatory, but if we come to terms with an agreement, we could proceed. Next slide. This is a slide, again, that should be familiar to you because it shows the parsing out that we did through budgeting and how it directly affects us for our non-mandatory programs and services. Water management services, planning, conservation services, restoration, non-ERCA lands, management agreements with Holiday Beach, water quality program, landowner incentive programs, tree planting on private properties, our demonstration farm, climate change specifically for biological adaptation. And again, through outreach, education, and other services, again, those similar programs that I identified. Next slide. Again, moving forward, recreation and conservation areas is non-mandatory, but subject to having MOUs, we could come up with contribution agreements. And so we'll have to negotiate what that is and what municipalities contribute. But again, it makes a poor business case for your staff here to be walking around the region and approaching different municipalities about the cost of doing some of these programs. And will you match that in your non-mandatory for recreational activities such as trails, such as Holiday Beach, such as bird watching and shorebird habitat at Hillman. The MOU will have to set out those provisions as identified here for how we do that business. Next slide. Part two will be again, our governance and oversight of CA. As the province said, we need to be fully transparent. There's a board report put forward here that I'm asking the board to support for a board resolution confirming that, yes, we will deal with transparency and governance and will comply with the direction of the province as put forward by CO in unanimity with the other 36 conservation authorities. Amending our administrative bylaws. Many of these things we are currently doing, but we'll have to amend accordingly to reflect on the instructions for the province. Next slide. Again, governance and oversight, what we're going to put forward for reporting mechanisms and accountability. Posting our minutes, we do that currently. Our codes of conduct, ensuring a consistent attendance, all that type of thing. That'll be addressed in some of the modifications we have to put forward in our administrative bylaws, complying with the provincial direction. Next slide. Again, community advisory boards. We have advisory boards in place on our conservation areas. We have a financial and audit committed Advisory Board, Committee Advisory Board. So it's not new, but having a generic Community Advisory Board being required, we need to understand how it functions and how it reports to this board and how it interacts with this board and its ultimate role. So we're saying to the province, what exactly is this that we're going to be looking for? What are our terms of engagement and what are our rules of engagement for this? This process we're familiar with as it relates to conservation areas properties, but not in an overall reach out to community activists or community developers or others and then report back to this board. Its form and function, how it functions with this board, it's yet to be determined. Next slide. The other regulatory matters, again, as I referred to earlier, our regulation is 200/88. It's going to be consolidated into a single regulation. With that regulation, it won't just be finding provisions for dogs off leashes and swearing in the park and other things like that. It will also incorporate what we are able to levy for and the scope and scale of land management activities on our properties. Some of those things are yet to be defined and yet to be determined, but will be covered in the Section 29 regulation. The Section 29 regulation will be modified to act and look more like our Section 28 regulation, but towards how we do things on our properties. Next slide. These are the things that your staff here are going to have to proceed with. Now, many of these things create an inventory of all program services by December 31st, 2021. Our budgeting process has identified some of that and most of that. How it actually deals with those things, we have to do some additional work with that. Core watershed-based resource management strategy, we have to come up with that. We have, through our 1983 Conservation Services instruction, we have some language that is still appropriate and still we act on, but it's not been defined for a watershed-based integrated watershed management planning kind of a management strategy, so it has to go on. And again, the 8 items are listed and identified here together with the time frame for which we have to do this. Now, we did not identify this in our budget because we were unaware of the implication of this on staff and staff time. This will have an impact on senior staff and senior management staff, and it'll have an impact on our most experienced staffers. When we get into September, at that point in time, we may be fully understanding its impact on capacity and the risk that we're going to be exposed to as it relates to pulling time out to get these things done to satisfy the province's instruction to do the basic work that we're trying to levy municipalities for, that we have agreements with here. So there's opportunities costs, and then there's also risk management costs that have to be looked at here and assessed with meeting these requirements. And it's a very, very tight timeline. We are capable of this, but we're going to be managing some risks of exposure for turnaround times and other things here that I'll have to be reporting back to the board possibly in September. Next slide. Concerns and issues, again, mandatory programs and services. Our existing technical resource materials put forward by the old Conservation Authority's Water Management Branch, that's dated material and dates back to the 1980s. Several conservation authorities have grouped together historically, and I've participated personally in with some of those on updating studies, updating requirements, updating other things. But basically, we were regional watershed management agencies attempting to update something that the province actually holds the responsibility to fulfill. So we're saying to the province, fine, we'll update and we'll move ahead with some of these things, but fundamentally, it's the province's responsibility to come forward with technical guidelines that are current and technical standards that are current that we then will take and modify and apply locally to our watersheds. Again, we've dealt with funding cuts from the province for basic fundamental things such as flood forecasting and updating the WECI and maintaining these WECI projects that we have millions of dollars of investment in the city of Windsor and in every municipality throughout this region. So if we're going to transition through another funding model here and additional regulations, well, in province, you need to step up to the plate to don't cut us further with the monies you're providing that allows us to provide those fundamental programs and initiatives that are your responsibility on your behalf. Next slide. Recreational use is non-mandatory service. During COVID, your ratepayers attended all of our properties, and their core health and mental health was able to be assuaged and managed by them being able to get out and utilize trails and get into some of these properties, enjoy fresh air, and not be encumbered by the threat of being around other people, or be able to social distance in the outdoors to enjoy the outdoors. We don't have a capability to recover costs to operate those recreational uses on those properties. So creatively, we can deal with things such as licensing certain activities and some other things, but you can't put a license stamp on somebody's forehead if they want to go out and walk on one of our trails or utilize one of our greenways. So we have to come to terms with how we deal with non-mandatory funding and contribution agreements for something like trail use, access conservation areas, and our conservation areas exist in all municipalities throughout the region. Windsor to Pelee Island all receive the benefit of our conservation areas throughout the region. Next slide. The Community Advisory Board. We have familiarity with this as a process, but its implications and as it relates to, the board picking these people or picking the group and then how it reports to the board and, that reporting function, the costs associated with having an existing or an additional community advisory board, that affects our budget. Because obviously if people are going to be asked to participate on these boards and they have to attend meetings and staff then have to prepare minutes and report back to this board about what those determinations are, there's going to be costs associated with that. And some of those have to be refined and identified and addressed both by the province and this board through administrative bylaws and ultimately through budgeting. Next slide. And again, more concerns about, costs, capacity of staff. It's a significant undertaking for your staff here to prepare these minutes, to prepare these reports, have them out to you in a timely fashion. And if we're going to be doing additional work with additional mandatory boards and board structure, that impacts on staff and the cost to do so. And in fairness, we need to address all of that and have that up front and forward. So again, if we're going to respond to the province's instruction to be transparent, that has to be addressed up front in our budgeting processes. And additional costs, if we strike these memorandums of understanding for contribution agreements, do we require legal? Do we require lawyers to be engaged? There's a potential cost there. Next slide. The preview of phase 2, what it is, what it's going to provide for us. There's language that it's going to address, again, your senior staff, that we can actually have a levy towards staff administration costs and some of those other things I referred to in some of the earlier slides. Next slide. Next steps, we've already participated in the webinars. We have participated in some of the comments and some of the commentary being put forward by we're reviewing the consultation guide, obviously. We are participating on the teams with discussion with Conservation Ontario. Conservation Ontario comments draft form are going to be available shortly. We are going to review those and then flavor ours with our local watershed issues and concerns, and then respond to ERCA region-specific comments to the MECP, because there will be. ERCA is slightly different than Lower Thames. ERCA is slightly different than the Toronto region and the Rideau. So we have our own watershed characteristics, our own political needs, our own watershed needs, our own ratepayer needs. And so there will be some comments coming forward. Next slide. This is a recommendation associated with this PowerPoint presentation, and it again is a recommendation that follows the earlier recommendations put forward in earlier slides. happy to attempt to answer any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wish I could have been more brief, but there was a lot to unpack with this guideline and what the province is requesting us to consider.
No need to apologize, Mr. Burney. We appreciate all of the information you provided this evening. It's very detailed. Do we have any questions or comments from any of the board members? Vice Chair Kieran?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Burney, for unpacking all of that. Very complicated, and I think it's going to remain complicated as you continue to go through the process. A couple of questions that I had. I know that the province, after passing the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, convened essentially maybe I'll call it a review committee of folks to sort of look at what some of those regulatory pieces might actually look like moving forward. Is that committee still working, or have they completed their work and brought their recommendations forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, in response, yes, that committee is still active. And again, Minister York reached out and handpicked, select people to sit on that committee. He also asked several to act as technical resources, and some of those people as technical resources reached out to, people such as myself and others in the province that have some experience. And we were able to actually provide some input and shifted some of the focus specifically for the listing of non-mandatory services and some of the issues relative to non-mandatory services. So we're still anticipating that there's some wiggle room. Now, there's a lot of fear out there with respect, they're cutting all, you can't do these things. The suite of water management, resource management activities that your staff have been engaged with are still available to be engaged with. It's just historically, some of the commingling of some of these activities in a levy is no longer provided for. It's going to be through a contribution agreement that some of these other activities can undertake, and it can only be undertaken if memorandums of understanding are first struck with all member municipalities and approved by this board to allow us to consider some of those action and activities, such as recreational activities, such as private land tree planting, such as some of the citizen science activities that we've historically been engaged with. So it's going to be unpacking of a historic business model. There's the inference being more transparent, but I don't know how much more transparent you could be to have this board act on, we are going to do X and it's going to cost this much money and this is how much money we're going to need to do it. But a different model was looked at and was considered by the province and was instructed for us to follow. So we're going to have to work through those details and see what we can do with it.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, just I guess the reason I asked that question is because it sounds like you're being asked to prepare. There's some deadlines in terms of you sort of, again, unpacking all of what it is the province has asked you to do, but the target still seems to be moving to some extent. You talk about having a lack of clarity on some of the pieces that they're asking you to sort of put, be able to put in place and explain to municipalities moving forward or through the list of mandatory versus non-mandatory. Plus, you have the committee also working that could potentially come with different recommendations that would perhaps change fundamentally some of the things that you're already doing, or that some understanding of some of the things that you're already doing. So I guess it's more of a comment, is that I think you're trying to do like I said, hit a moving target right now with a hard deadline to the end of the year to come forward with something when it's I don't envy you in terms of the challenge that you have.
Through you, Madam Chair, and a follow-up on that, and thank you, Vice Chair. Initially, 2021 was the deadline. And I think the work that the committee did with Minister York's office persuaded that if you want transparency and accountability, we move ahead in 12-month budget cycles that are prepared 12 months in advance of that 12-month cycle. And to think that this is all going to be packed up and actually accurate and adequate by the end of this year, it's not. That by the end of this year, we will fulfill, where we have to be, the transition planning, where the pain might be, where the business model may have to be, and all of that type of thing. So that transition planning is going to have to be in place there. 2022 gives us an additional year to finalize negotiations, agreements, and coming to terms with the memorandums of understanding. So I think, to the committee's credit, they were able to persuade that, we need at least another year to work through these ultimate details of how we do this work with our member municipalities and how we actually budget properly and allow our member municipalities the opportunity to be engaged properly and do their own budgeting to account for it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bernie. And I do have a motion at the appropriate time, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Vice Chair Mackenzie, if you'd like to go ahead with your motion.
Sure. I'm just trying to pull it up. As I recall, it was the recommendation is a motion to receive.
Yes.
But I'd move the recommendation.
Okay, moved by Vice Chair Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Desjarlais. Any opposition? That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Bernie. We also have another report for approval, Conservation Ontario Governance Accountability and Transparency Initiative. And Mr. Bernie will be speaking to this report as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be much more brief on this matter. But this matter is actually that the 36 conservation authorities actually put a motion forward to say, yes, we are in agreement, and yes, we will comply, and yes, we will proceed with the Governance Accountability and Transparency Initiative. And what it specifically refers to is, 3 specific actions that we will have to update our administrative bylaws. One of the significant impacts that has on us, unfortunately, that we would lose quality representation that we've been very lucky to have historically through people such as Marilyn. The town of Essex, we had appointed members in the past from the town of Essex. We've had appointed members who are basically, general public at large. The amendments here do not account for or provide for that because of the structure of what the province is saying administratively we're going to have to comply with. So we won't have the opportunity to have members appointed by municipalities. Where that falls, we have to update our administrative bylaw that says 70% of all membership has to be an elected official. Well, the numbers of each municipality, there are 2 sitting members of, say, Amherstburg. So we would have to saw a piece off of Marilyn or a piece off of Peter that we would meet that percentage requirement. It's a physical impossibility. So there's also the potential requirement that the minister could appoint a representative from the agricultural community, and that would be fine. That appointed representative, though, has no voting opportunity on levy or memorandums of understanding. So, and that could be appointed by the minister. And there's some other technical refinements that are identified in the report in front of you. Proactive reporting, and number 2, and also number 3. Your staff here are already actively engaged in many of those processes. We will have to refine some of those processes to account for and meet those instructions being put forward. But the province and Conservation Ontario has asked us to put forward that resolution. Staff is in support of that, and the recommendations are in front of you as a board this evening.
Are there any questions or comments? Okay, on the recommendation. We need a mover on the recommendation. A Deputy Mayor Verbeek, Councillor Sleeman. Anyone opposed? And that is carried.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you. As we move to approve the 2020 audited financial statements, we would like to thank Lindsay Iatona from the firm Hicks, McPherson, Iatona and Dreger LLP for joining us this evening to present the 2020 audited financial statements. Shelley McMullen, who has prepared the report before you this evening, is also available to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, if I may make a comment.
You certainly may.
I think for an interested lay person or a non-financial person, page 92 of the agenda, really in one very small chart, you can really glean an understanding of how all of the transactions, including the impacts of COVID, affected the bottom line. So I would encourage anyone, if you can't stomach reading through all the financials and all of that information, just look at page 92 and very quickly you'll have an understanding of how we ended up in a more positive position than was originally anticipated.
Thank you for that, Shelley. Do you think you or yourself or Nicole could possibly share page 92 on the screen at this time, or is that not possible?
I can certainly bring that up. It's just going to take me a moment, please.
Certainly. In the meantime, then, if Lindsay would like to begin. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
So the audit committee, the Finance and Audit Committee Advisory Board met with Lindsay on June 9th. We went through the financials in detail. Also, we went through, some members had some questions regarding the extent of, testing of the internal controls. And so Lindsay's presence here today is really not to go through the financial statements because that's the role of the audit committee, but to just field any questions that the general membership may have regarding, just how extensive are the internal controls tested and what their audit opinion really serves, what that assertion, what its purpose is, right? So that's why Lindsay is here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, then I will ask if any board members have any questions. Deputy Mayor Bailey.
Thank you. Through you, I am prepared to make the motion when the time comes.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Karen.
Thank you, Chair. And we did have a very good meeting and a great discussion, I think, at the Finance and Audit Committee. Lindsay, thank you for the presentation that you gave us there and the work that you undertook to do the audit in the first place. The question is a similar question what I asked when we met. As an auditor, and in terms of the back and forth between you and our administration in terms of the information that you needed to have in order to conduct the audit in the way that it needs to be conducted, how would you characterize that flow of information and the transparency that needs to be had in order for it to be done correctly?
Well, good evening, everybody. Yes, we did have an in-depth conversation, I guess that was last week, and similar type comment to last week in that the information flow that I receive from administration from ERCA is we get a full package. We get the full statements, we get a full package. Everything is referenced, organized. There is not, I don't want to say there's not a lot of back and forth because obviously we ask questions, but we get such a complete package with what I would refer to as a pretty bow on top of it. This isn't their first time under this process, and I think they've really streamlined everything to make it as efficient as possible, likely on their end, and as well for the audit process for us. And in regards to back and forth, we do look at controls in the organization, we update all that. So there is quite a bit of conversation back and forth, but that's more in relation to updating our understanding of the controls. For example, this year, obviously operations look quite differently with COVID and staff working at home. So that causes some back and forth to update our understanding compared to a prior year where, you know, everybody was under one roof. So there is back and forth, but not in the manner of not receiving everything in any full capacity.
And thank you for that. And I mean, your audit report is you're satisfied with all of the findings. I think there was one, like in comparison to other municipalities or other agencies that you work with, that the level of disclosure was and the organization of the materials, given the extreme complexity with, especially with COVID, was at a high level. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think our conversation basically I was relaying the fact that and again, coming from an accounting background, these reports are obviously of higher interest to me than maybe other individuals, but the reports that Shelley puts forth to explain the financials and what she, you know, highlights and tries to put it, you know, in terms that we can all understand and delve from those financials what we really want to take away. She does a great job at that. She also, I thought, went above and beyond in the impact of COVID to your organization. I can't say I've seen something like that. And I think that was one of the specific items we were talking about. There's a note on the financials. It's a subsequent event. We're still living a subsequent event here. Basically that relays, you know, the impact to the organization. And we're not, you know, once COVID ends, we'll for sure be able to quantify. She has gone through that difficult task and already taken some, you know, good, not estimates, but her professional judgment on quantifying that for you. So again, that just shows the level of review, of thoroughness, you know, and not just reactive, proactive as well. So again, her reports are always of interest to me in her approach. And again, likely because of my financial background, but it is quite interesting compared to other audits we perform.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you've undertaken, Lindsay and Shelley as well. It's probably one of the most challenging years you'll have to be able to put these financial statements together in the way that they need to. And I think you did an incredible job, and you and your Mr. Bernie and all of the staff, I think, should be commended for this high level of disclosure. Thank you.
And myself, I do completely agree with everything Vice Chair Mackenzie just stated. Marilyn Morrison.
Thank you. I would just like to say that what I find very, very good, excellent actually, is the way Shelley puts her all of it together. It's so easy to read the financial statements. Her notes to it are understandable. And I think the majority of us are not finance people as such. And to be able to read the statements and understand them, and it's just put into layman's terms in my mind, and it makes it very, very easy. So easy to read and understand. And from my perspective, I would like to thank Shelley very much for that. I think it's an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Any additional questions or comments? So we do have mover for the draft audited financial statements, Deputy Mayor Bailey. And may I have a seconder? Trevor Jones. Trevor Jones seconds. Anybody opposed? And that is carried. Now there is a second recommendation related to this report, but before I ask for a mover to this motion, do any members have any questions? Nope, we already moved on from that. Sorry. That administration with the support and recommendation of the Finance and Audit Advisory Board be directed to transfer $50,000 of the unrestricted operating surplus to the infrastructure reserve in order to address short-term funding pressures as related to the multi-year donor pledges for the construction of the new conservation center at the John R. Park Homestead Conservation Area. I do need a mover. Councillor Lucier and seconded by Councillor Bowman. Anybody opposed? That is carried. James Bryant will respond to any questions on this report. Designations of Sydney Clanchett Regulations Analyst as Provincial Offences Officer.
Madam Chair, if I could interrupt, my apologies. Sydney, can you turn your camera on?
And I am sorry as well. Just I have froze up for a few moments and everybody else did. So I do apologize if I skipped there, but you're all clear again now. So
okay, proceed, James.
Continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Madam Chair, may I make a quick comment here prior to questions?
You certainly may.
Thank you. Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that over the years, the recent years, ERCA staff that have attended this course to obtain their designation have consistently scored near the top or at the top of the class. And Ms. Clackett, who is with us today, is no different in that regard. So I want to offer her a little bit of congratulation on her accomplishments with that regard. Thank you.
Quality mentorship.
Fantastic.
Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are looking at the Essex Region Conservation Authority Board of Directors designate Ms. Sydney Clackett, Regulations Analyst, as Professional Offences Officer under the Conservation Authorities Act. Moved by Councillor Joanne Gill, seconded by Deputy Mayor Joe Becchetti. Anybody opposed? That is carried. City of Windsor Council request dated April 6th of 2021. Mr. Tim Burney will provide a brief introduction and respond to any questions on this report. Please note that administration will be seeking board direction on this request and will require a motion. Mr. Burney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I had this distinct pleasure to appear a couple of occasions in front of Windsor Council this year on a couple of separate matters. There was some debates and discussions and other things that took place. There's a request that came forward from council, but it's a repackaging of a previous request. The Essex Region Conservation Authority is not like the library board, is not, an ABC. The Essex Region Conservation Authority is governed by this board of directors and also has to comply with legislative instruction to satisfy full auditing and auditing accountability that this board has just gone through and proceeded with. Third-party audits set up a potential conflict. They set up additional costs that at this point in time with Bill 229 are not within the core mandate that we can levy for. And if it's a special request put forward by a municipality for an action or an activity, well, then the municipality should have pay for the full request. Regardless, administration has put forward this request and again is seeking instruction from the board how we are to proceed. Again, it was put forward as a request and the motion from the city is attached.
Okay, any questions or comments? Vice Chair Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. So when this issue came forward at our council, I opposed this when when we voted on whether or not we would undertake to send this correspondence, and I continue to remain opposed. And I'm opposed because I recognize that this organization is among the most transparent organizations that I've in my time as a counselor, and even as my time as a person who's worked in the public sector for several years at this point. This meeting is live streamed. Our agendas are published on the website. Our minutes are published on our website. Everything that we do is addressed in public, and certainly this issue is there's no avoiding the fact that it's related to the social engineering incident that we dealt with, and through that process, I'm very proud to say that I think that we as an organization were incredibly transparent throughout all of that, informing our partners, informing the public, and keeping board members apprised of the information that they needed to be apprised of through that process. And if there was any doubt in my mind that this organization wasn't acting with at a high level of transparency and accountability to the public, I certainly would be looking for a number of different ways to improve upon that. I definitely wouldn't be supporting the City of Windsor's Auditor General exercising authority over this organization. And as we see in the report and the legal opinions that we've had, that even contemplating that is extremely problematic on a number of different fronts. But I would be thinking about suggesting whether or not we would undertake to engage an auditor general for this board through our own processes. But as we heard today, our auditors are telling us and telling the public that we are operating at an incredibly high level in terms of transparency and accountability and disclosure to the public. So for those reasons, I will have a motion, but I certainly would oppose this proceeding or allowing acquiescing to the request that's come from the city. And as I said, I will have a motion at the appropriate time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So we do see Mark Carrick, Len Janice, and then Jim Morrison, and then Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Mackenzie said it really well, spoke well to it. We've dealt with this before. I believe as a member of the health unit, this was tried before too as well. And I agree with all your comments. And we're not a commission, we're not a board, we're not an agency of the city, we're not a board of the city. We are a group of the county and city representatives together, and we are a conservation authority. So therefore we should remain independent of those actions. And I certainly support your comments.
Thank you. Councillor Janice.
Thank you. No, I just, similar to Mr. Carrick, we dealt with this before, and I think we even had legal advice. So I don't see that changing. Our answer should be the same thing. As far as AG for this board, I don't think that's necessary. We have a great audit here, and I don't think we should spend the money on an AG for our own board. That's my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Janice. Councillor Morrison, and then Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly I concur with the comments of Councillor Mackenzie. I think it's important that the councillors from Windsor here speak up once again. We, just like Councillor Mackenzie, I certainly was against this motion. I was the person that pushed and brought forward an Auditor General for the City of Windsor at the beginning of this term. This is not an area that person should be going into. You know, I'll be frank, there's a couple people that just don't want to let this go and just keep wanting to look for something, I don't know, that isn't there. If I felt for 1 second that we hadn't dealt with this properly, fully, I would be looking for more transparency, but I really honestly can't feel like that we have done everything we should have done. And you know, I guess I don't think we can dispel any of the rumors that go on out there. We all know that we've dealt with this issue here on this board, and so I'm certainly not going to go down the road that we keep moving this, and which doesn't do us any, or doesn't do any good, because it just keeps perpetuating any kind of rumblings or rumors that are out there. So this was totally dealt with, and we should be moving on a long time ago. And I certainly encourage the City of Windsor's council to move on as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Desjardins.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I'm going to echo the comments from my colleagues. I do think that this is a complete waste of time, effort, money. If our auditors are saying that we're preparing excellent reports, we are transparent, we're not hiding anything. I'm not sure who's looking for what, but I believe that there's nothing there to be found. And I do think that it's time that the City of Windsor councillors who are looking for something get off their high horse and just accept the fact that we've done things properly. Yeah, we had a glitch. It's been sorted out. We know how it's been fixed. Moving forward, we're not looking at that. And I would be prepared to second a motion from the Vice Chair.
And thank you for your comments as well. Councillor Vanderdolen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, well, as a member of this board and having sat through some in-camera meetings, I have no worries about how ERCA has handled its finances, but I hope the public is not missing the irony here about the political war going on within Windsor Council. That the same people who want to spend a huge amount of money auditing Windsor Council don't want an auditor here. That is absurd, and I hope voters notice this. I won't be fighting this or pushing this. This is not my political fight. It's internal in Windsor, but this is pretty amusing. And there's nothing wrong with our books. We don't need an auditor, but it's still amusing at who's fighting who here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else have any other comments or questions? I am wanting to refrain from some comments. I see Mr. Burney just reached up closer to the screen there. I agree with what everything has been stated here, and from the beginning, we are all very competent individuals on this board. We're elected officials. With the exception of Ms. Morrison, but by all means, I believe her credentials far surpass mine and her abilities and experience in the political level. So I do appreciate and respect all of the comments that were stated here today. And I understand that Councillor Vice Chair Karen Mackenzie has a motion he'd like to put on the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So the motion would be as follows: that the ERCA board deny the request of the City of Windsor as it relates to the Auditor General, and that administration communicate those results to the City of Windsor through formal correspondence.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Desjardins? Anybody opposed? That is unanimous and carried.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you, board members. We have report BD 1521, the John R. Park Heritage Center update. Tim Burney will answer any questions related to this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Construction on the Conservation Center, the Heritage Center at the Homestead site is proceeding quite well. There's been a couple of hiccups we've had to work through. We've had the opportunity for some local contractors and others to come forward to more than willingly reach out and ask for the opportunity to be involved in the initiative. There were some challenges and problems that came through with some materials design, and some design elements that had to go through significant modifications. Those modifications were put through and now have been finalized. And I need to acknowledge through the benefit of some very generous donations have kept us on track with dealing and responding to the pandemic and dealing and responding to some COVID type materials that were put forward, and also assisted with dealing with some hiccups that came about as a result of attempting to manage a project like this during the pandemic that we've just hopefully coming out of. And the recommendation is in front of the board, and I'm happy to entertain any questions if they are wish to be asked.
Thank you, Mr. Burney. Do we have any questions or comments from any board members? Well, seeing none, I need a mover for the recommendation. Councillor Bowman, and seconded by Councillor Jones. Any opposition? Seeing none, that is carried. Report BD 1621. Shelley McClellan will be able to answer any questions regarding this report. Again, it's the unaudited statement of financial operating activities for the 4 months ended April 30th of 2021. Any questions or comments from board members?
Tanya, you're on mute.
Madam Chair.
Goodness, I'm so sorry. I am seeing no questions or comments. Okay, then I'm looking for someone to move the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Verbeek, seconded by Marilyn Morrison. Anybody opposed? That is carried. Thank you. The terrestrial and aquatic habitat restoration, the Detroit River and its watershed, report BD 1721. Kevin Money is available to answer any questions related to this report. Any board members have any questions or comments? And Kevin, do you have anything you want to maybe speak to?
Through you, Chair. The only thing that I'd like to highlight on this report is that this is a summary of 20 years of restoration work, and contained within the report. It's actually quite extensive, and I think as a staff and as a board, we should be quite proud of the fact that we've restored over 1,000 acres of habitat within the Detroit River and its watershed, which is something to be quite proud of, in my opinion. That's the only thing I'd like to highlight on this report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Money. So I need for the report BD 1721 to be received, moved by Councillor Desjarlais, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Anybody opposed? That is carried. Report BD 1821, data-driven decision-making for changing climate in Essex region, RBC grant update. Kevin and Claire will be available here to answer any questions or comments for any board members. And do we have any questions or comments for either Claire or Kevin? No? Claire, is there anything that you would like to highlight, or Kevin? Hi, Claire.
Good evening. Thank you, and through you, Chair. Only that this is a project that I was very proud of as well. Our ecologist is going to be, biologist ecologist is going to be retiring in a few years, and some of this is his life work, and getting it into a database in order to establish baseline conditions across our region and integrate it with our water data is of critical importance, I think, moving forward. So I was really pleased to be able to work on this.
Okay, well, thank you. We need a mover for report BD 1821, moved by Deputy Mayor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Lucier. Anybody opposed? That is carried. Report BD 1921, the County of Essex Regional Energy Plan. Claire, again, can speak to any questions to this report. Do we have any questions or comments, board members? Claire, is there anything you would like to highlight in this report?
It was a huge undertaking and one that we were able to accelerate despite COVID. It's usually a 2-year process. We were able to accelerate it. We had a lot of engagement across municipalities and with many, many stakeholders. And I do hope to be coming to each one of your municipalities as well with this information as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And may I have a mover for that to be received? Moved by Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Gill. Anybody opposed? That is carried. Report BD 2021 Watershed Management Services Activities Report for April and May 2021. And James Bryant is available for any questions or comments. Do any board members have any questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Certainly.
there is a couple of comments Mr. Bryant would like to put forward on the report.
Fantastic. Thank you. Go ahead, James.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Yeah, we don't normally speak too much to this report, so I'm just taking the opportunity to kind of highlight a couple things. That would be that in late 2020, ERCA staff issued a memo informing the municipalities that inland pools and decks would no longer require a permit from our office. So that effectively removed about 150 to 200 applications that would normally be circulated through our office. There were some good reasons for doing that. But now when we look at the numbers, what we're seeing now is we're keeping pace with last year's numbers. So keeping in mind that we removed those 150 to 200 over the course of that year, really, if we had those included, we'd probably be, or certainly be ahead of the game if those were there. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a little bit of a highlight. What that does mean is because we're still dealing with that volume, staff, they're doing the best they can to respond to people, and sometimes in shorter timelines, it becomes difficult to respond maybe within what those clients on the other end want, in terms of that really short time period. So they're doing the best they can, and moving forward, we're going to continue to deal with this. We're continuing to look for efficiencies moving forward, and the objective is to still deliver on our I'll consider it top-notch customer service at this point. So thank you for allowing me to speak to that.
Oh, thank you, James. Mr. Burney?
If I may, Madam Chair, if the development services work directs and we are starting to slip behind turnaround times, then I will be coming to the board and identifying staffing needs and responding accordingly. What James is identifying too as well, just a little bit of detail on that. You may be asking yourself, what the hell are you issuing a swimming pool permit for? Well, normally associated with that is landscaping materials, grading, filling, and other activities that are actually identified in the regulation as regulated. Our friends and colleagues at the building departments have to deal with all applicable law, and they are bound to circulate us those things. We've come to terms with them to come up with a bit of a minor works kind of a category that we don't need to see that type of activity, especially when our friends and colleagues in the building departments are doing such an admirable job of dealing with grading and filling in those areas that might fall just in the regulated area, but don't cause us a concern for flooding and don't cause us a concern for erosion. So credit to James and his staff right now. They've come to terms with how they're going to work with some of that minor category. The real challenge is, though, we are seeing break wall collapse and we are seeing significant jump in development, as all your building departments and planning departments are probably identifying to you. And it is amazing the type of development that we're seeing being put forward. This activity that we're engaged with right now, and the process that we are doing this type of meeting, now it's being enjoyed by people who are approaching James and his staff who want to apply for a permit. They have a conversation and it's like, okay, give me my paper. Well, give me your paper that shows me what it is that you're doing. Show me your technical details and give me at least a minute to review those technical details to ensure some level of compliance. So we're getting, the perception of just in time being able to be delivered. And sometimes we're getting a shotgun approach to people putting in a request. When they come to our office and they request an application for permit, they are assigned a specialist, a technical person to deal with them. If they're not immediately responded to, they try and jump the queue and go to somebody else. And then we're getting a myriad of proposals coming in. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And so it creates some additional clerical work as far as like, what are we doing with and what are we managing? So there's some challenges out there, but again, if the need arises and the revenue stream is there, I will come to this board and I will request staffing for this department and others as required.
Thank you, Mr. Burney. So on report BD 2021, I need a mover to receive the report. Councillor Desjardins, Councillor Bowman, anybody opposed? That's carried. Report BD 2121, environmental registry reports. Conservation Ontario comments on the consultation on growing the size of the Greenbelt to Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. On the report, we need it to be received. I need a mover to receive report BD 2121. Any questions or comments? No. Moved by Councillor Janice, seconded by Deputy Mayor Joe Becchetti. Anybody opposed? That is carried. We have 7 pieces of correspondence to be received by members this evening for information. Does anybody want to pull out anything for conversation, questions or comments? Okay, so on the correspondence received, need a mover? Councillor Carrick, seconded by Jim Morrison. Nobody opposed? That is carried. Prior to this regular meeting of the ERCA board, the board met in committee of the whole. I would like to call for a resolution to adopt the actions of the committee of the whole. I require someone to move the motion. Moved by Councillor Bowman, seconded by Councillor Gill. Anybody opposed? That is carried. Is there any new business members wish to address this evening? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Deputy Mayor Verbeek, go ahead.
Thank you, worthy chair. It was a year ago that I was asked about this, and it's hard to believe that a year later I'm still going to ask for this request. It involves the lottery for hunting permits. They usually start right after Father's Day in, like, say, the Hill in March. So I guess if Kevin's still here, Kevin, what is your anticipated way of handling this? Are you going to just continue? The people that have the permits now can continue for another year. How are you going to run the lottery, if you don't mind?
Through you, Chairman. So we are going to be doing a virtual draw this year, a fair and transparent one. Staff have made a few minor tweaks to the online draw, and we plan on actually posting all of that information for all the hunters and the hunting community, potentially even tomorrow, if not tomorrow, then on Monday. So there is an opportunity for everyone to participate and put their name in for a draw for the various hunting opportunities within our conservation areas.
And where could they find the application, so I can kind of lead them there? Just the ERCA, and then follow through. Is there more than 3 clicks to get to it?
Through you, Chair. So the applications, like I said, will be posted either tomorrow or on Monday. We're just waiting for the technical staff to finish off a few minor items associated with it, so that people can register for the draw. It's an online registration process, and they'll be able to do it then. been communicating with many hunters regularly, and Nicole can attest to this as well over the past few weeks. And yeah, it's all going to be posted on the website. So right now we have 4 different hunting programs that are going to be posted. Our Cedar Creek hunting program, our Hillman Marsh hunting program, our Big Creek hunting program, and our deer hunting program will all be posted at once. And then we'll follow up with our Holiday Beach hunting program, which is slightly different and operated in a different way during the summertime.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, thank you. And Councillor Patterson, you had your hand up there. Go ahead, Larry.
Yes, if this is still under new business, I'm anxiously awaiting and looking forward to our staffing needs that Mr. Burney will provide to us by our September meeting. This is one of the most busiest times ERCA has seen in my term of being on a council. And year after year, we all do the talk. Yes, let's look into it, but I think it's time that we do something about it. So I'm anxiously awaiting, and hopefully Mr. Burney and his directors and managers will come to us with a real question and a solution on how we can rectify and help our public, and also ease some of the burden on the staff at ERCA. And if I may follow that up with one quick comment, I just got done a accessibility meeting, and members of our committee was very happy to see that Mr. Money and the rest of the board have put together that website that they can also send in when they're out walking on our trails. Very good move on behalf of ERCA. So on behalf of our accessibility board of the town of Kingsville, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Does anybody else have any new business? Okay, another business then. The next meeting of the ERCA Board of Directors will be held on Thursday, September the 9th, 2021, starting at 6 p.m. via Zoom web conferencing. We are looking for a mover to motion to adjourn. Councillor Larry Patterson, seconded by Jim Morrison. Anybody opposed? That is carried. That concludes the meeting for this evening. Thank you all. Please continue to enjoy all of our conservation areas and trails this summer. Stay safe and happy Father's Day weekend to all the fathers.